The crash in the valley. Marcus Chen had always been told that curiosity killed the cat, but nobody ever mentioned what it did to 14-year-old boys on colony worlds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the red dirt of Kepler 4 for 2B as Marcus shouldered his collection pack and headed toward the restricted zone beyond New Haven's protective barriers. His official mission was simple: gather mineral samples from the eastern quarries for the colony's monthly geological survey. His unofficial mission was far more interesting. For weeks, Marcus had been hearing strange stories from the mining crews. They spoke in hushed tones about unusual energy readings detected 3 kilometers into the Forbidden Valley, an area marked off-limits since the colony's founding 15 years ago. The adults called it dangerous terrain, unstable ground that could collapse at any moment. But Marcus had studied the geological surveys, and he knew better. The valley was solid bedrock, carved by ancient rivers that had dried up millennia ago. The real reason the valley was forbidden had nothing to do with unstable ground. It had everything to do with fear. Marcus checked his chronometer as he approached the warning beacons that marked the boundary. His parents, both senior engineers in the colony's power division, thought he was spending the day with his friend Jake, working on a school project about atmospheric composition. Jake thought Marcus was helping his parents with routine maintenance. In the power plant, it was a perfect cover, giving him at least 8 hours before anyone would miss him. The forbidden zone stretched before him like a wound in the planet's surface. The valley walls rose nearly 200 meters on each side, their surfaces scarred by wind and time. Marcus had brought climbing gear, water for a full day, and most importantly, his father's military-grade scanner. If there really were energy readings down there, he intended to find their source. The descent into the valley took 40 minutes of careful climbing. Marcus had trained for this, spending months building his strength and endurance in the colony's recreation center. His parents thought he was just staying fit, but Marcus had bigger plans. He'd always dreamed of being an explorer, of finding something that would make the adults take notice of him as more than just another colony kid. The valley floor was eerily quiet. No wind reached this deep, and the walls blocked out most of the sky, creating a twilight world of shadows and silence. Marcus activated his scanner and immediately got results. The energy readings were stronger here, pulsing in a regular pattern that suggested artificial origin. He followed the signal deeper into the valley, his boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Then he saw it. The object was massive, easily the size of New Haven's main habitat dome. It lay partially buried in the valley floor, its surface a mixture of what looked like metal and something else. Something that seemed to shift and flow like liquid when he wasn't looking directly at it. The shape was wrong for any human vessel, all curves and organic angles that hurt to look at for too long. Marcus approached carefully, his scanner now screaming with energy readings. The object was definitely artificial, but it was unlike anything in the colony's database. The surface felt warm under his gloved hand, and when he pressed his palm against it, patterns of light began to race across its surface, like electrical currents following invisible pathways. A section of the hull suddenly became transparent, revealing an interior that defied human understanding. The spaces inside were arranged in impossible geometries, with surfaces that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Marcus found what might have been an entrance, a circular opening that dilated like an iris as he approached. The interior was even stranger than the exterior. The walls curved in directions that made Marcus's eyes water, and the floor seemed to adjust itself to his footsteps, becoming more solid where he needed to walk. Bioluminescent strips provided gentle illumination, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The air smelled of ozone and something floral, completely unlike the recycled atmosphere of the colony. Marcus found himself in what could only be described as a control room, though the controls were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Instead of buttons and switches, the surfaces were covered with raised patterns that seemed to shift when he touched them. In the center of the room was a chair, or at least something that might serve as a chair for a creature with a very different anatomy than humans. The seat was too wide, too low, with strange protrusions and indentations that suggested the builders had a radically different body plan. Marcus tried to sit in it and found it impossibly uncomfortable, with supports pressing against his spine in all the wrong places and armrests that were positioned for limbs that bent in directions human arms couldn't manage. That he struggled to find a comfortable position. Marcus accidentally brushed against one of the control surfaces. The room exploded into light and sound, with displays appearing on every wall, and a voice speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with mathematics. The chair began to adjust itself, trying to accommodate his human form with mechanical precision that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. The voice stopped abruptly, replaced by a series of tones that seemed to be asking a question. Marcus tried to respond, but the voice cut him off with what sounded like surprise. The language changed, cycling through dozens of different sounds and patterns before settling on something that almost resembled human speech. Unusual, the voice said, the words heavily accented but understandable. Physical parameters do not match expected crew specifications. Genetic analysis indicates impossible results. Please identify yourself and explain your presence aboard the research vessel Quantum Harmony. Marcus swallowed hard. I'm Marcus Chen from New Haven Colony. I found your ship crashed in the valley. Are you the pilot? I am Sentinel, the ship's artificial intelligence. I am not the pilot. The pilot is. There was a pause, filled with sounds that might have been data processing. The pilot is deceased, killed in the crash event approximately 732 of your planetary rotations ago. 2 years ago. The ship had been here for 2 years, and nobody in the colony had known about it. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. What happened to you? Marcus asked. Why did you crash? Navigation failure during atmospheric entry. The ship was damaged by an electromagnetic storm and lost power to the main propulsion systems. Emergency landing procedures were initiated, but the pilot was injured during the crash sequence. I have been in hibernation mode since then, waiting for rescue. Rescue from who? Another pause, longer this time. From the Jektai Empire. This vessel is the property of the Jektai Scientific Collective, assigned to conduct biological surveys of primitive worlds. The crew was investigating reports of unusual life forms in this system. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Primitive worlds? You mean planets like this one? Correct. KEPLER 442b was designated as a candidate for biological harvesting. The mission was to catalog local species and determine their potential value for scientific study or resource extraction. Resource extraction. Marcus's voice cracked. What kind of resources? Biological materials, genetic samples, occasionally intact specimens of interesting species. Sentinel's voice remained perfectly calm, as if discussing the weather. The preliminary surveys indicated the presence of a recently established colony of unknown origin. The crew was investigating. When the crash occurred, Marcus gripped the arms of the impossible chair, his knuckles white. Unknown origin. You mean the human colony, New Haven. I am unfamiliar with the term human. Please describe your species' physical characteristics and technological capabilities. For the next hour, Marcus found himself giving the strangest interview of his life. Sentinel asked detailed questions about human biology, culture, and technology. The AI seemed particularly interested in human adaptability, asking about everything from diet to problem-solving methods to social structures. Marcus answered as best he could, though he often felt like he was taking a test he didn't understand. That they talked, Marcus began to understand the true scope of the situation. The Jektai were not just another alien species. They were an empire, a vast civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. They were ancient, powerful, and they viewed younger species like humans as little more than interesting animals to be studied or resources to be harvested. "Show me what the Jektai look like," Marcus said finally. The main display activated, showing a three-dimensional image that made Marcus gasp. The Jektai were nothing like humans. They stood nearly 3 meters tall on 8 crystalline legs, arranged in a radial pattern around a central body. Their torsos were translucent, showing internal organs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Instead of heads, they had sensor clusters that could rotate independently, and their limbs could bend in ways that defied human understanding of anatomy. "They're beautiful," Marcus said, and meant it. The Jektai were alien beyond imagination, but there was an elegance to their form that was undeniably aesthetic. "The Jektai are indeed a remarkable species," Sentinel agreed. "They have evolved beyond the limitations of fixed biological forms. Their bodies can adapt to different environments, and their minds can process information in ways that most species find impossible to comprehend. And they're coming here. The ship's emergency beacon will activate automatically in 71 hours and 43 minutes. When it does, it will transmit our location and status to the nearest Jektai fleet. A rescue vessel will arrive. Within 2 to 3 weeks, Marcus felt ice in his veins. What happens to the human colony when they arrive? Sentinel's response was matter-of-fact and terrifying. Standard protocol for unauthorized settlements on designated research worlds is immediate containment and removal. The colonists will be relocated to appropriate facilities for study. The planet will be restored to its natural state. Study. What kind of study? Biological analysis, behavioral observation, cognitive testing. The Jektai are always interested in new species, particularly those that show signs of technological development. Humans appear to be quite promising in that regard. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his entire world settling on his shoulders. Every person he'd ever known, every family, every friend, every dream and hope of the colony. All of it was about to be swept away by creatures so advanced that they viewed humans as laboratory specimens. Is there any way to stop the beacon? Negative. The beacon is hardwired into the ship's core systems. It cannot be disabled without causing catastrophic damage to the vessel. However, Sentinel paused. There may be alternatives. What kind of alternatives? The beacon will transmit a standard distress signal, indicating the loss of a research vessel and requesting immediate rescue. However, the beacon can also be programmed to transmit other types of messages. If the correct protocols are followed, it could be used to send a preliminary research report instead. Marcus leaned forward. What would that do? It would indicate that the research mission is ongoing and that the crew has discovered something of particular interest. This would delay the arrival of rescue vessels while additional specialists are assembled. It could buy you considerable time. How much time? Possibly several years. The Jektai are thorough in their scientific endeavors. If they believe a world contains something truly remarkable, they will invest significant resources in proper study protocols. Marcus felt a spark of hope. What would we have to do? The message would need to be convincing. It would need to describe discoveries that would genuinely interest the Jektai scientific collective, and it would need to be transmitted from someone with the proper authorization codes. Do you have those codes? I have the pilot's authorization codes. However, there is a problem. The authorization system is biologically locked. It requires Jektai genetic markers to activate. Marcus stared at the display, his mind racing. But I activated the ship's systems. You said that should have been impossible. Yes, that is ... unusual. The activation protocols are designed to recognize Jektai genetic patterns, but they appear to have responded to something in your biological signature. This suggests ... double quotes, Sentinel paused, processing. This suggests that human genetics may contain elements that the Jektai would find extremely interesting. Interesting enough to delay their arrival. Potentially, if the message were crafted correctly, it could present humans as a species worthy of extended study rather than simple collection. This would require demonstrating qualities that the Jektai value: adaptability, intelligence, and potential for technological advancement. Marcus stood up from the uncomfortable chair, his legs shaking from both physical strain and emotional stress. How long do we have to prepare this message? 71 hours and 37 minutes. Then we'd better get started. Understanding. The builders the next 2 days passed in a blur of desperate learning. Marcus barely slept, barely ate, and barely thought about anything except the impossible task ahead of him. He had to convince a spacefaring civilization that humans were worth studying rather than collecting. And he had less than 72 hours to figure out how Sentinel proved to be an invaluable teacher. Though the AI's method of education was unlike anything Marcus had experienced, instead of simply providing information, Sentinel guided Marcus through the ship's vast database, encouraging him to discover connections and patterns on his own. The AI seemed to understand that humans learned better through exploration rather than wrote MEMORIZATION. The first thing Marcus learned was that the Jektai were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They didn't seek to dominate other species or steal their resources. Instead, they were driven by an insatiable curiosity about the universe and its myriad forms of life. They collected species not out of cruelty, but out of a genuine desire to understand and preserve them. The Jektai see themselves as gardeners of the galaxy. Sentinel explained as Marcus studied files about previous first contact scenarios. They believe that younger species need guidance and protection to reach their full potential. Most species they encounter are relocated to worlds specifically designed for their needs, where they can develop safely under Jektai supervision. That doesn't sound so bad, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. For many species, it is not. The Jektai are benevolent caretakers. They provide everything their subjects need: food, shelter, medical care, education. Many species thrive under their protection, but they also lose their freedom. Once a species becomes part of the Jektai collective, they are never allowed to develop independently. They become permanent children, cared for but never truly autonomous. Marcus understood. It was the difference between being a pet and being a person between being protected and being imprisoned. The Jektai might mean well, but their idea of help was still a form of captivity. The second thing Marcus learned was that the Jektai had very specific criteria for what made a species. Interesting. They valued adaptability above all else, the ability to solve problems in creative ways and to thrive in changing environments. They were fascinated by species that could modify their behavior, their technology, or even their biology to meet new challenges. Humans excel in this area, Sentinel noted as Marcus studied the criteria. Your species has colonized worlds across multiple star systems, despite having no natural adaptations for space travel. You have developed technologies that compensate for your biological limitations. This is precisely the kind of adaptability that the Jektai find remarkable. But other species must have done the same thing, Marcus argued. Space travel isn't unique to humans. Actually, it is quite rare. Most species that achieve interstellar travel do so through biological evolution, developing natural abilities that allow them to survive in space. The Jektai themselves are an example of this. Their bodies can adapt to different atmospheric conditions, and their minds can process the complex calculations needed for faster-than-light travel. So we're unusual because we're not naturally adapted for space. Asterisk, you are unusual because you achieved space travel despite not being naturally adapted for it. This suggests a level of creativity and problem-solving ability that the Jektai find extremely valuable. The third thing Marcus learned was that the Jektai had a complex social structure based on intellectual contribution rather than physical dominance. Their society was organized around research collectives, groups of individuals who worked together to solve specific problems or explore particular areas of knowledge. Status was determined by how much one contributed to the collective understanding of the universe. This is why the preliminary research report could be so effective, Sentinel explained. If the report suggests that humans represent a new form of intelligence worthy of study, it would be referred to the highest levels of the scientific collective. They would want to study humans personally rather than simply cataloging them. What would we have to prove? You would need to demonstrate that humans can contribute something unique to Jektai knowledge, something they cannot achieve on their own or with other species. Marcus spent hours studying examples of other species that had successfully negotiated with the Jektai. There were very few, and most had involved species that were nearly as advanced as the Jektai themselves. The others were unique in ways that seemed impossible for humans to replicate. One species had developed a form of mathematics that could predict quantum fluctuations with perfect accuracy. Another had evolved a group consciousness that could process information faster than any artificial intelligence. A third had developed biological computers that could solve problems by growing new neural pathways in real time. We can't compete with any of that, Marcus said, feeling defeated. Humans are just ... human. Perhaps you are thinking about this incorrectly, Sentinel suggested. You are trying to match the achievements of species that have had millions of years to develop. Instead, consider what humans have accomplished in the short time since you achieved sentience. Marcus looked at the timeline differently. Humans had developed from primitive hunter-gatherers to spacefaring colonists in less than 10,000 years. Most species took millions of years to make the same journey. Some never made it at all. We're fast learners, Marcus said slowly. You are rapid adapters. When faced with new challenges, humans do not simply evolve new biological capabilities. You create tools, develop technologies, and modify your environment to meet your needs. You are one of the few species that has achieved technological advancement without significant biological evolution. And that's unusual. It is unprecedented. Most species either evolve biologically or develop technology. Humans have done both simultaneously, creating a hybrid form of advancement that the Jektai have never encountered. Marcus began to see the outlines of a strategy. Humans weren't just another species to be catalogued and collected. They were something new, something that might teach the Jektai, something about the nature of intelligence and adaptation. What kind of message would we need to send? A message that presents humans as a research opportunity rather than a collection target. Something that suggests studying humans in their natural environment would yield more valuable data than studying them in captivity. How do we prove that? By demonstrating human problem-solving abilities in The message would need to include examples of human innovation, preferably solutions to problems that the Jektai themselves have struggled with. Marcus spent the next day researching Jektai scientific challenges. Despite their advanced technology, they had several ongoing problems that had stumped their best minds for centuries. Most involved the intersection of technology and biology, areas where their highly evolved but rigid thinking patterns created blind spots. One problem particularly caught Marcus's attention. The Jektai had been trying to develop more efficient, faster-than-light communication systems for over 1,000 years. Their current technology was reliable but energy-intensive, requiring massive power sources that limited its practical applications. Marcus studied the problem for hours, comparing it to similar challenges that humans had faced. The Jektai approach was typically elegant and complex, involving quantum entanglement, cascades, and multi-dimensional energy matrices. But as Marcus looked at the specifications, he began to see patterns that reminded him of something much simpler. "Sentinel," he said finally, "what if they're overcomplicating this? Please explain." The Jektai are trying to create a perfect communication system, one that can transmit any amount of information instantly across any distance. But what if the problem isn't about transmitting information? What if it's about transmitting meaning? Marcus pulled up the human colony's communication protocols, which were designed to maintain contact between settlements across vast distances with limited power. The human approach was much simpler than the Jektai method, but it was also much more efficient. Human communication systems focus on compressing information into the most essential elements, Marcus explained. We don't try to transmit everything. We transmit enough to convey meaning, and let the receiver fill in the gaps based on context and shared understanding. The Jektai approach is to transmit complete information packages to ensure perfect accuracy, Sentinel noted. But perfect accuracy requires perfect power, which is why their system is so energy-intensive. What if they used a hybrid approach? Perfect accuracy for critical information, compressed transmission for everything else. Marcus spent the next 6 hours working out the mathematics, using the ship's computer systems to model different approaches. To his amazement, the hybrid system would reduce energy requirements by over 90%, while maintaining acceptable accuracy rates for most applications. "This is significant," Sentinel said after reviewing Marcus's work. "Your solution addresses a problem that has challenged the Jektai for centuries. However, it is not complete. The compression algorithms would need to be tested extensively before implementation." "That's the point," Marcus said excitedly. "We don't give them a complete solution. We give them a breakthrough that requires further study. We show them that humans can contribute to Jektai science, but only if we're allowed to work as partners rather than specimens. And you believe this will convince them to delay their intervention. I believe it will convince them that humans are worth studying. In our natural environment, we're not just another species to be catalogued. We're a potential resource for solving problems they can't solve on their own. The final 12 hours before the beacon activation were spent crafting the message. Marcus worked with Sentinel to encode his communication breakthrough into the proper scientific formats, along with detailed observations about human colony behavior and technological development. The message portrayed humans as a rapidly evolving species with unique problem-solving capabilities that could benefit the Jektai scientific collective. But the most important part of the message was the request. Instead of asking for rescue, it asked for a research team. Instead of reporting a failed mission, it reported the discovery of a species that warranted extended study. Instead of requesting immediate extraction, it requested time to conduct proper scientific protocols. The message is ready, Sentinel announced with 3 hours remaining. However, I must warn you of the risks. If the Jektai determine that the report is fraudulent, the consequences for your species could be severe. Marcus nodded grimly. And if we do nothing, the consequences are guaranteed to be severe. At least this way, we have a chance. You are gambling with the lives of everyone in your colony. I'm gambling with the future of humanity, Marcus corrected. If this works, we buy time to prepare for real first contact. If it doesn't work, we face the same fate we would have faced anyway. The beacon activated exactly on schedule, sending Marcus's message racing across the galaxy at speeds that defied human understanding. The transmission took less than a second, but it would take weeks for the response to arrive. Marcus climbed out of the crashed ship and made his way back to New Haven Colony, his mind buzzing with everything he'd learned. He had become humanity's first ambassador to an alien civilization, and he was only 14 years old. The adults wouldn't believe him, at least not until the Jektai response arrived. But that was a problem for another day. For now, Marcus had bought humanity something precious, time to prepare for a future that would be unlike anything they had ever imagined. As he walked through the colony's familiar streets, Marcus realized that everything had changed. The quiet settlement on the edge of human space was no longer isolated. It was part of a vast galaxy filled with wonders and dangers beyond imagination. And somewhere in that galaxy, ancient beings were reading a message from a human boy who had dared to speak for his entire species. The future was uncertain, but it was still a future, and sometimes that was enough.